evening, everybody, and welcome to the Reed Center. We're incredibly pleased that everybody is here tonight to learn more about the library's renovation. And we're going to be doing a presentation first. We're going to share information about the renovation, about the funding. We're going to provide information about the library in general. And then after our presentation, we're going to turn it over to our panel. I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves in just a second. Once the presentation is over, the panel will take questions from the audience. You'll see that there's 2 microphones down at the end of the aisle, so we'll be utilizing those later in the evening. But before we get started, I wanted to thank the Reed Center. This place is amazing. If you've never had an opportunity to come to an event here, please do. They have concerts and presentations here, plays. Many of the programs that they have here are free or low cost. And this was our Tiffany windows, so if you've never learned about those, please they do a presentation on the windows as well in the history of the Reed Center. So thank you for hosting us. We really appreciate being able to use this space this evening. So my name is Dina Little. I'm the director of Morrisson-Reeves Library, and I'm going to allow the panel to introduce themselves one by one.
I'm Kevin McCurdy, architect with LLC, live here in Centerville, so I guess lifetime resident of Wayne County, as usual.
Hi there, good evening, Jason Tansel with Vacancy Lead, and we assist the library as a senior supervisor.
Hi, I'm Lee.
I see that. Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm Jennifer Lewis. I'm one of the members of the Board of Trustees.
Hello, my name is Adam Morris. I'm a local attorney. I'm on the Board of Trustees, and I also am a lifelong Richmond and Wayne County guy, and could be happier to be up here and see all of you here tonight. It means a lot to our community, so thank you.
Station here in LA. I lived most of my life here, and I've been a lot of different crowds. I'm also a trustee. I am a health manager, financial advisor, trade through data. Thanks for being here.
Sarah Farrell with Dice Miller. We serve as law counsel at the library.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for introducing yourself. All right, so welcome and thank you. I'm going to go over a little bit of how we got here. So what is the process that we've been involved in the last year? So I'm going to briefly go over that, kind of a timeline of the steps that we've taken to get to this point. And then briefly review what are we talking about today. So how did we get here? So we've been experiencing acute issues with the building and increase in volume and cost for renovators over time. So in the spring, early spring of 2024, we hired Kevin to perform a facility assessment and engineers to come to the library to explore everything from top to bottom to see what's happening with the building. And it took quite a few months, but by the end of the summer, he was able to present the board with a facility assessment, which he's going to share information about after I'm done with my introduction. But he discovered major concerns with the building. So he presented that to the board. Early options that the board considered were to spend out savings for just temporary measures and address larger renovation needs down the road. But they agreed that that was basically throwing good money away. Whether the revenues are tax or donations or what have you, that they should be spent on long-term solutions. So the board leaned towards a renovation, a full renovation to address everything at once. We agreed that it would be less turmoil for staff and patrons, less cost over time, and a better solution for the community. Which then brought us to winter of 2024. We began what's called a master planning process. This is very typical for public libraries. A master planning process is essentially working with the public to determine what kind of library are you looking for. We knew what issues were going on with the building. We know we needed to address those things. But we have an opportunity. If you're already tearing things down, what do you want it to be when you built it? And so that's what the master planning process was. And that was introduced in November. We started a public session in December of 2024. And we've continued public sessions throughout the months. Part of those public sessions, we had an updated website, we had surveys, we had social media, we did a lot of emails and engagements to want to say we're the 14th library we worked with. He's very experienced with library buildings, which are they're a unique space. They're not like a supermarket or a church, right? They're a unique space. And so you want somebody that has the experience and understands the operations of the building or the library or public space. So that ended around May, and then in June, we engaged with the county council and shared a presentation with them. Here's the issues in the building, and then here's the plan that the community worked with us to build for the future of Morrisson-Reeves Library. We wanted to introduce it to them because we'll share in a minute how they're our fiscal body. We continue to answer questions from the council, from the community about the project, and then we requested the council's approval for a library bond in August, which was tabled to give more information, to gather more information to make a wise decision. So tonight's forum, that's why we're here tonight. We want to ensure that the public and the council is fully informed about this project, that everybody has a chance to have the questions answered, to raise concerns. Like this is the chance. We've had a lot of these forums for the last year, and this is kind of the big culmination of our forums. We want to also clarify some areas of misunderstanding. We've heard a lot of questions, and I wonder if everybody else thinks that as well, or has those questions as well. So we're going to take this opportunity to clarify some misunderstandings. And then we're going to share information. So Kevin's going to explain about the facility. For those of you that have participated with us over the last year, you'll be familiar with some of the information he'll share, and it'll be new for some of you. So we're going to clarify the facility issues, the renovation needs, and the funding options for the library renovation. And then we're going to open the floor to your questions. As I mentioned, we'll have these 2 mics available. If we do have time after questions, we'll open it up for comments, but we do want to hear questions first. So I want to clarify that we really prioritize transparency throughout this whole process. This is the library's, the library belongs to the communities, the community's library, so we really leaned into hearing what people have to say, and we wanted to make sure that everybody was aware. So we appreciate the level of engagement that we've experienced with all of you over this last year. So, some areas of clarification. I want to do a little bit of a library 101. We're going to talk a little bit about what is the library. Sources of revenue, so where do we get the money to take care of the library and the operations of the library? And then how do we fund, what are our options for funding capital projects? So these are just brief information, and more in-depth answers. Myself and the folks in the panel can help answer those as well. All right, so what is the library? Well, the library is a government unit. We're not managed by local government, so we're not managed by the county or the city. But why do we go to them for their fiscal body? So that can be really confusing. I think that makes sense that it's confusing. We're independent. We have our own board. We have 3 members of our board tonight. They're an appointed board, not an elected board. We rely on tax revenue to operate and maintain our library. And all the revenues that we receive and we spend down are overseen by the Indiana state government. So the DLGF and the SBOA, they come in and they make sure that every penny we get and every dollar we spend is overseen. And then we also operate under Indiana laws. There's actually laws that are very specific to libraries in Indiana, such as what are the minimum services we provide, how do we get our revenue, how do we spend our revenue, how we're governed, even to the point of how many hours we're open, what days and what evenings, how many evenings a week we're open. So we really, our services are structured under the state and how the community engages with us and what the community needs and wants from us. That also provides a lot of direction for how we operate. How we approach capital funds and capital projects is also structured under the Indiana state laws. And then finally, the most important piece is the Morrisson-Reeves Library is not a nonprofit. We don't operate our revenues under fundraising. We do receive tax revenues to operate. And that's an important distinction that we've heard some confusion about these last few months from folks in the community. All right, so how libraries are funded? How are they funded? So we receive two main sources of revenue. They're both taxes. We receive what's called a property tax. You may have heard a levy before. Sometimes people say it's a levy. So it's basically a percentage of the property tax that property owners, business owners, farm owners pay. So that's the vast majority of our revenue. And that helps us to operate the library, pay for the books, pay for the DVDs, make sure we have staff, pay for the heating, all of those things, that's where that money comes from. The other pretty big portion of our revenue is local income tax. You may have heard me refer to LIT, especially recent legislature is changing the LIT structure in the future. So that's what that is. There's also some other miscellaneous revenues, but those are under 1%, they're not large for us. So our two main sources of how we operate are the levy and the LIT. Oops, I went too far. All right. And this is the important piece. We have limited fiscal authority. Remember, we have an appointed board, not an elected board. They're a volunteer board. They're not being paid for. They're volunteering their time to govern the library. So the library doesn't have the authority to change or increase or to adjust our taxes. We also don't have the authority to spend beyond our annual budget. If we wanted to do that, we would go to our county council, which is our fiscal body. And we also don't have the ability to approve our own bond, which is why we go to them for our bond. That's really common in Indiana. So, why is the county council our fiscal body? We've had a lot of people reach out and think that we've been engaging with the city council. It really just has to do with where our service district is. It kind of is all over the place, and the county council is our fiscal body, who we would go to if we need to spend more than our annual budget, or if we need to borrow money. What about fundraising? So, libraries don't typically fundraise directly. On occasion, a library might host a fundraiser, like a fund fundraiser. Library boards are not paid their volunteer positions, so they're not necessarily fundraising either. Instead, libraries partner often. You may have heard of the Friends of the Library. They're amazing partners to us. They're their own organization, and they fundraise for the library. And they're amazing. They raise about they donate about $30,000 to $40,000 to the library every year, and money goes back to the community in the form of programming. If you've been to One World, One Play, which we put on in September, that's funded through the Friends of the Library. So that's our opportunity for fundraising. And there's a limited capacity for that. We couldn't raise $18, $20 million through the Friends of the Library. They're fantastic, but that's beyond the capacity for Richmond, Northern County. So how do we fund capital projects? What about savings? I'm glad you asked. So there's actually a law that limits how much money we can save, and there's a good reason for that. The money that we're given should be making sure we have a great library, not sitting in the back pocket, right? So by law, we can only save 150% of our annual budget, which is not enough to fund a large capital project like what we need to do to get the library back in order. So really bonds are kind of it for us. I'm going to very much oversimplify this. I'm not a bond interpreter, I'm a financial advisor. But a bond is basically borrowing money to pay for large projects and paying it back over time through tax revenue. Very, very simplified. I'm not the expert on that at all. There's two different or most common bond options or bond types. One is the petition remonstrance. That's what we've been doing. So it allows for a voter-initiated process to stop a project from moving forward. So if no petition from the community takes place against the project, then we can move forward to request that bond approval to our fiscal body. The petition remonstrance type of process is very flexible in terms of time, and that's why one of the reasons that the board chose to go that direction. Because the issues that we're facing with the building are time sensitive, and so we know that we would have to wait potentially years if we wanted to go through the referendum process
versus the petition and response process, which was a lot quicker for us, and that's why we went down that road. And then I mentioned the referendum. So that is taking it to the people for a vote. You may have heard of referendums. Other states, it's very common to have a bond or some referendum. If the vote wins, so if we were to do a referendum, if the vote wins, we would still need to take it to the county council as our fiscal body for final approval. It's less flexible in terms of timing, but it's actually going to become more common in Indiana. We'll see it probably more over the years that government organizations are taking things to referendum because of the recent changes in the state legislature. All right, I know that was a lot, but we wanted to clarify some of these areas of confusion. And I'm a librarian, I like to share information, and I want people to be informed. So we hope that clarifies a few things. I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. He's going to get into the nitty-gritty of our facility assessment and all of the options that were considered in terms of what to do next.
All right, perfect. I was on the microphone earlier, so if you didn't hear, I'm Kevin Purdy with LWC, the architect. People either love me or hate me. Usually when I do a facilities assessment, there's not so much love because I'm pointing out a lot of problems which people don't love to hear about. I'm going to run through this relatively quickly so I can maybe get. Look at that, isn't that? So we can get to more of answering some of the questions that came after this, because I think this information is shared before. And the other thing I'll reiterate what Dana said, I think part of the reason for this forum is really to answer additional questions you may all have about information that's been provided or gaps using any information you want to clarify. So we can always come back and if anybody needs to see any of these slides, don't feel like you're missing things. We can move relatively quickly. The facilities assessment, we like to do this on the beginning of any project because it's easy to get enamored by the fun stuff. You know, when you're putting in the new children's department and bringing new books in, people get excited and it's easy to get carried away and forget. There's all this other infrastructure that we need to maintain, pay for, take care of, and spend some dollars on as well. We don't want to forget that. So the facility assessment is really to come in and understand what have you got today and what's it going to take to take care of that. And what we do is look at 3 levels. Level 1 is the most critical. Hey, it's like a code issue, it's an ADA issue. If you don't do something, somebody can get hurt, something can fall apart. The second level, priority 2, is really that's a maintenance thing. Think of it like, I know I've got a roof leak, but I'm going to kind of ignore it because I'd rather spend my money going out to dinner. This is number 2, you should probably do this in the next couple of years, or in 5 or 10 years, that roof's going to be like a hole in it, versus just a leak coming through it. 3 is, these would be nice to have, they might make my life easier, but I didn't have them. I could certainly still continue to operate. So those we look at more like 5 or 10 years. So we try to help organizations understand, hey, I may be pointing something out, but it would just probably be nice to fix that base that fell off the wall, but it's not going to hurt anybody. Whereas, hey, if that railing is about to fall down, somebody can fall over that, that's number 1. That's the stuff we really want to make sure we're taking care of. So that's how we go through these things. So the first thing, and these I would say are the number 1s without doubt that we ran into, are a couple of items. The fire suppression system, sprinklers, think of, there's not one in this building. Typically, a building of this size would have one. Any space that a lot of people can come to, or more than 300 people can fit, code tells you I should have a fire suppression system. And so, and again, to be clear, code changes over time. I'm speaking of this in today's code. So, and part of the reason we have to do this is if we start to do a renovation, we have to fix these things that we're seeing based on today's code. So again, there's no fire suppression system, there's no fire alarm system, and no smoke detectors. So you think of your own house, not having a smoke detector or something in there to alert you to a problem. Those are 3 pretty big ones that need to get addressed. So those are like, hey, these are definitely number 1s. The 4th one may be a little less obvious. I'll show a picture, but some of the railings you'll see are kind of getting to the point where you're probably leaning on them too hard or too much force on it. They may get away. Again, you don't spend any conversation thinking things are good and not. And then there's the lack of property egress. That's a fancy architect term for not enough doors and ways to get out of the space. So again, I'll point that out here in some imagery. So again, on the railings, and if you look at this image over here, this pointer's not super great, but the one on the far right, you can see this is the bottom of this railing that goes all along the ramp up to the library. It's pretty well rusting through at this point. So again, point being, if a group of people are leaning on things, it's not in a good place and it really needs to be fixed. So that's a safety issue. And again, you're seeing the same thing. It's just, I know everybody thinks, including myself, it's where I went in high school to the library all the time. It surely can't be that old, but it is, and it's 50 plus years of existence, so it is getting to be what we are in some years. So these things just happen over time. For example, this is not somebody who didn't do something, this is things wearing out. In fairness, that probably should have been buried deeper in concrete, but I think that all the folks that did this are probably going by now. I can't necessarily go back into the town, unfortunately. This is the lower level, and this is what I was talking about with the egress issue. So this doesn't relate to the upper level. This has everything to do with that lower level. And when you go down there for some of those services that are in the basement, there is a set of stairs that comes up. So that's definitely one way out. The other two ways go through this kind of space, which is a no-no in our code world. You can't go through a space where there's a bunch of stuff stored and like it's a staff space, it's got a pretty more people directly outside. So again, when I look at a facility, these are the kinds of things I look for. Can somebody safely get out? When there's an emergency and we don't know I'm going to be in panic mode and I'll be thinking clearly, how do I just get out? This doesn't lend itself to how do I get out through all of this because there's no obvious way. So again, this is something that needed to be addressed in the high priority. The other things we found, and I think anybody that's gone to the library that has some mobility challenges, things like that, if you've got a wheelchair, even if you're on crutches, even if you've had surgery, is how do I get around? There is the ramp that goes up to the front. I mentioned this before, it doesn't need technically ADA for today. I think I've had some folks talk about it's a little steeper, it feels, like it's hard to slow myself down if I'm in a wheelchair. That's all accurate because that ramp is technically too steep for today's requirements of ADA. So again, if we start to do a renovation, that's something we have to address. I know people like the word grandfather. It is grandfathered in for right now. So this stuff is, so again, it would be as we get it, we need to address. Similar thing with the open staircases, you go to the lower level, think of like you get my toe caught, I've had to wear that boot that you wear when you hurt yourself, and when that thing would get stuck in there, that's the reason they don't want open stairs for things like that. So that would need addressed. We already talked about the egress downstairs, and then the restrooms. For anybody that's been in those, it's hard for me to negotiate those, let alone if I have crutches or something else. They're not really built for requirements. So these are just those images, again, getting in or out. A lot of places are negotiating stairs, things like that, other than having ramps, that limits where you can get throughout the library. Again, those are the open stairs that we're talking about, where things can get caught. This is actually my way to get out of that lower level. If I can't get up through the building, let's say there's a fire up the stairs and I need to come outside, this would be a challenge for probably, again, you need to negotiate if I was absolutely panicked. So this is the kind of thing that we need to be fixing. The other big thing, and these are more in that tier 2 category, really a lot of the systems, and some is in tier 1, and the rest we'll talk about, is probably the biggest one to trigger all this. All of the systems are really approaching end of life, and by that I mean electrical systems, mechanical systems, again, they've been there for 50 years, so I think most of us who have a house probably get our mechanical system changed out over that lifetime, so that's not unusual. The big one though has been the brick. This is actually what got us called out to look at this. So this is, you can see looking at the front of the building, that dapper gentleman is the structural engineer we had out to look at this. But you can see that gap should not be there. And what triggered all of this was there were actually pieces of metal sitting down on the brick when you come up. That was falling out there. That piece of metal really was technically holding that brick up, so that should actually be up right in the brick and have that 1/2 or 3/4 inch gap. What that is a lot of water has gotten in here and it has no way to get out. Typically you have like weeps, we call them, little holes that allow the water to get out from behind that brick, and there's none of that that exists. So unfortunately when there's rain or snow, it's getting in there, it's just sitting there and rusting this metal away that's supposed to be supporting this. And you can see it here where in some places we could actually kind of stick pins and pencils through where that brick, there's really not a lot that's holding it up. So And again, it's kind of a repeat here of you're just seeing a lot of this. The outside is just deteriorating, and I think causing a safety concern where folks are coming in and out of the building. Again, there's more of this. I think the 70s were an era of the cantilever brick. We thought it was awesome, so we did a lot of it. So it is all over the library. That's what this is, where that brick is just hanging out, and it's nothing but the steel really holding it up. So unfortunately, once that steel is attacked, there's really not a lot more that's going to be holding that up over time. And again, this is the magic of the 70s. Let's put it all over the place. So again, this is just something that has to be addressed, and especially this is that north side of the building. So it's the parking lot nobody knows you can use, but we all think it's staff only, but it turns out we can all use. I didn't know for the longest time. If you look at all of this along here, it's actually, it looks like a wave across that, up above these, and these are actually all leading out away from the building. And again, it's not like, it's going to fall over tomorrow, but again, if we start to do something, we need to get this stuff addressed because there are physical, structural things that are failing in the building. And unfortunately, it's gotten to the point, some of this water's starting to come through. So these are inside images where water's gotten all the way through, it's now affecting finishes on the inside, which again, back to your roof analogy. If you start to see water on the inside of your house, there's a good chance it's attacked a lot of stuff along the way to get there. That didn't start yesterday. I probably started 6, 12 months ago when I got a bigger problem and just started putting their wall up. So seeing this level of stuff on the inside is not a good thing and tells us with private issues. And again, then the other things are all of the systems. So these are all mechanical systems, etc. A lot of the stuff isn't even really used. For those who use the library regularly, I think you've all probably experienced the elevator being down. Hopefully you've been trapped in there. I've heard horror stories. I've never had the experience, but again, you get to these end-of-life things where they just need to get traded out. I don't even know what this stuff is because it's not really used anymore. It's sort of hooked to stuff that nobody quite understands. So part of that, again, is things have been upgraded. Some have been pulled off, some not, and there's not real clarity on how that works. So we took all that information, and again, I'm going to go back to 2024. The board at the time thought they were doing the world was different. Now imagine 2024, before we had tariffs, and before we had, a lot of what's going on in the world, and the changes to legislation in Indiana and how things are funded. To the point earlier, we thought we were going to follow, a little bit more of the process we have on other libraries, which is you go through your design, you go to your body that you need to get approval for, and you move forward on the project. And I don't want to be flippant about that, because again, there's a lot of rigor that goes into that, but there is kind of a bit of a formula. Here's the steps we take, and here's the process we go through, so we're going to try to follow that process. I think one of the big things that's happened, and you can be critical for or against, but the reality is where we're at. The thing that we're at now, I think, is the new legislation, this is Kevin's opinion, from seeing this on other projects, and working on a couple of other public projects. What it's trying to do, I think, is push a lot of this up to the library. I think in the past, we kind of talked about these things, we did them, they got voted on, like 4 people in the county knew about them, and then they kind of just went about their merry way. I think what we are getting to is a point where this is what we're going to be doing. So, good or bad, here we are kind of talking in a more public forum than I would say I have on the other 13 libraries that I work on. So, I'll actually take that as a positive that you all are weighing in more than maybe I've seen in some other projects. But what we got to in that process was moving from on the left is the existing library as it stands today, and the right is what, and working through all of that input that we got from you all, from other members of the community, a new layout for the library. So the thinking was, if we're going to have to do this level of fixing on the library, my gosh, we better come to you all because this is going to take tax dollars to fix and find out what else would you like to have in the library. That was the rationale behind all of that. And that's what led to reorganizing from really children's and adults to all of the colorfulness that you see, which again are just a variety of different services. And same thing on the lower level. And I think the bigger thing on the lower level is important because a lot of the work we do, you can see in the red there, only 40% of that lower level is accessible to the public, or 60% is staff / back of the house / never used. Interestingly enough, you go back and that was all shelving and books down there that the public could go to. But just over time, as things have changed, less and less has become available to the public. Part of the move to the right is to, let's bring that back to public use, so it become more of an 80% public, 20% staff, which again is a more normal utilization for library spaces. So again, the idea was let's fix things, let's bring the services again that the community is asking for, and turn more of the building back over to public use. So that's the part that's been talked about before. Here's the new information. So this has not been talked about before, and again, take notes whatever you want to. We can certainly come back to this and you can ask follow-up questions. But there's been a lot of, why does this cost so much? Did you make up these numbers? Did you pull them out of the sky? And how did you get this? A little bit, yes, but a little bit we do try to base them in reality. I mean, I jokingly say that there is some basis to them, but there is a little bit of magic to it, and by that I just mean no two projects are the same. But what we do to base it in some kind of reality is we do look at past projects because we are bidding stuff all the time. And especially when we get CMs, construction managers that we work with, we get to see their breakdowns. So I spent this much on steel, I spent this much on roof. We can use that to inform projects like this where we're trying to figure out where we go. So that tends to be the basis of how do we get here. The magic part is, again, no project is the same. This project is no different. So how do we quantify some of those things? So that's where we kind of got to use our judgment in there. But what you can see are just kind of the data points on this. So the library is roughly 53,000 square feet. That's how much you have upstairs plus how much you have downstairs, and just area on the floor. Ignore all the walls, ignore the stairs, that's just the square footage of the space. The estimated cost is $23,815,000. And you're like, yeah, where did that come from? Surely you made that up, that is a lot of money. And you're correct, it's a lot of money. But where we made this up from, and I'm using that again, a little bit funny here, is we extrapolated it from all of these projects that we're currently working on. Either they did, they just completed, and then what we always do is bring them up to today's dollars. So all of these projects have been within the last 2 years, or they're currently underway. Then we right-size them, and there's the data that's available to say, well, construction costs have inflated 12%. I'm making that number up over the last 2 years, so increase your numbers by 12% from that past project to get apples to apples. That's what all of these numbers down reflect. So we are 3 weeks away maybe from finishing Newcastle Library's renovation. It came in at $191 a square foot. But within that project, it was mostly an interior renovation. There was some outside sidewalks, things like that. There was no roof, there were no structural repairs, there were no exterior cladding being dealt with, and there were no windows being replaced. So from that standpoint, all of those elements I just mentioned, we have on this project, which is why that's $191 a square foot, and I'm saying we are at $448 a square foot estimated here for this library. We are significantly higher than all of those really expensive things we're down in Newcastle. But if I go to Union County Library, where we're putting on an addition, we're doing a little bit more heavy lifting, so it's an addition plus renovation, it's at $527 a square foot. And just to be clear, that's the construction costs, that's the bonding costs for the experts that you're seeing here, that's my cost. So again, soft costs you hear sometimes for everything it takes to get it done. So don't think if I call a contractor up, they're going to give me those numbers. That is everything it takes, permits, printing, you name it, it's in those numbers. So that's an all-in cost. But again, that's $527 a square foot. I polled, and somebody can correct me later, in case I got this math all wrong. I did get some help on this, but I also back into some past costs I knew about. If I look at the upper floors of that, so the first floor on it, I didn't count the basement, so I added that square footage and bring this number down, and in terms of the usable space that got done, it's coming in at $351 a square foot. And again, 448, so we're still higher than that. But again, I'm still arguing with a lot more stuff to do. This is where it gets interesting. So Midpoint Library, that is a new construction. And I've been saying this for a while, and people didn't believe me, which is why I was going to go back and do math. I've been saying libraries are about $550 to $600 a square foot for new construction. That is pretty much what Midpoint Library came in at. So that's right across the state line in Ohio. But we've had a couple of others that came in about that number. And again, we had a ribbon cutting 3 months ago maybe. So again, it's right in line with that as current data. The other data point I have, which is absolutely just coming, in fact, it is demoing the building where this is going to go, is Boys and Girls Club over at Dayton. It's coming in at $484 a square foot. That, just to be clear, is a pre-engineered metal building. And to give some context, that, think of your fairground buildings, it's that. So again, it's not what you think of as a higher end finishes, it's trying to be space where kids can run around. So again, those are the basis that we use, and without getting too boring, because I'm probably already there, so I talked way too long, and I apologize, I just can't help myself. There are the line items behind that we can compare to the line item for this, that we get to this 448 square foot. So that's where it came from. It didn't kind of come out of nowhere, and it's not unreasonable for the market we were in. The other thing I want to point out, and Ice Miller and Baker Tilly can speak more to this because they always give me a really hard time about this. They always want me to make sure I have plenty of contingency. Contingency is that magical term for money we hope we don't have to use, but we put in there just in case we need to. When I look at the estimated cost at 448 on the first line, that includes a lot of contingency. And how much you ask? $4 million of contingency. So it's got 20% of contingency built into that. If I take that contingency out, I'm actually down to 373 square foot. So I say that, and that'll be important when I come to another slide here in a minute to explain that on a lot of these projects, we're asking for a number out here. Ultimately, what the bond gets issued for is what's going to bid. So again, I artificially, intentionally inflate the numbers to make sure it's safe, because a lot of times we're asking for money today. We may need a year of design, another couple of months of bidding, so call it a year and a half before this thing may ever come to life. Let's look at what's happened in the last year. Who knows where the market will be, which is why we put contingencies in. So again, in terms of the question about why is the number so high, one is just reality based off of these other projects, and two, we are putting contingencies in to protect the project. So the other big question that we have been asked, but again, I a lot of times weigh in on because I can provide some of the financial and then kind of the code-related information. What other options do we consider? Why are you doing what you're doing when it's so doggone expensive? So one of them was move into another building. I think the biggest challenge with this one is, one, just finding a space that fits. I mean, where are you going to find 53,000 square feet? They exist, but they've got some challenges. So that kind of automatically limits the pool of spaces. The other is number two up there, and that one's a big deal. Libraries are not other buildings. Libraries have bookshelves and stacks and a lot of stuff that's heavy. So when I go into the code book and open up that magical thick book that is completely boring, the weight limits, the requirements for libraries are twice anything else. So the minute I'm not just doing like a slab on a grade situation, like I'm getting into reinforcing stuff. And in fairness, even the Readmore, they had to do that when we were looking at that. As you look at current codes, that's the other trigger. Now if somebody got to bring it up to current codes, they had to reinforce the lower floor on that just to meet current code requirements for loading. Same thing, I know the running building is going through the same thing, we're also having to reinforce that. So the idea that I'm magically going to move out of one building and it'd be easier in another building really isn't the case. It may be that so far we haven't found a magical building that's going to be an absolute fit. The other is a change of occupancy. So let's say we moved into a building that was an office and now it's suddenly going to be a library. Well, that's a different use. And that's another magical term, occupancy in code that says, well, if you want to be, an office building, you can do X. But if you want to be a library, you got a lot more people in there. There's a lot more paper. People get real panicky. We need to make sure they can safely get out. We're going to set the bar a little bit higher. So if we go in and start to renovate something that wasn't a library into a library, our bar is going to be up here, and we're going to end up fixing a lot of stuff in our likelihood as well. So there will be costs associated with that. I put on there this one as an example because we are currently helping the Green Center with a chapter 34 change in occupancy. So we're very familiar with it even in this space, that when again you change the use potential of a space, you have additional costs to bring up the current code when that happens. And it's across the board, you really can't get out of that. The other thing is just, any renovation is probably gonna require, investment just beyond that, because you start to think of big open spaces of 53,000 square feet, or again, JCPenney's brought up, the mall, other things like that. They're gonna have to start to break that down into useful spaces, so you're gonna have costs associated. Plus, frankly, I think the board wanted to stay away from that, because there was a sense that downtown is home, it's walkable, there's a lot of development going on. So as the community is investing in that space, why would the library not also want to invest in that space that's generally being invested in? Another option that was talked about is do we tear down and build, but that'd be cheaper. On the surface, again, when you're looking at $24 million, it would be, you think, gosh, surely there's got to be a more cost-effective way. But the bottom line is, I would be, if I tried to build that based on those numbers we looked at on the last slide, I would be plus $30 million. And again, that's all gonna, that range that I'm giving you is gonna depend on what the finish is, what the systems, those are choices that we're making along the way, and they're all gonna relate to durability, they're not arbitrary. They're very intentional, but they could drive and swing that project $6 million within that range. But again, that's gonna be, call it $10 million, $8 to $10 million higher than the renovation cost that we're looking at. In addition, we have demolition. And part of what we're giving up is the fact that even though I said some of the structure is failing, we're giving up a good structure in the building to build a new one. With the renovation, we're utilizing all that existing structure, but still within the middle of the building. The other option was buy land and build new. Again, everything that's up above, we're basically going to inflict all of that cost. Even if we build the half-size building, that's still in that $16 to $19 million range, so we're close to what we're doing for renovation, again, twice the size of the new build. But I'm going to have demolition of the building where we're at. We're going to have fill it in, make that site decent, and then go build something else. So again, it didn't feel like a cost-effective use. Plus, again, I think the idea of staying where home is, the board really didn't want to move somewhere else. It feels like the library has been where it's been through its life, and that's where they want to stay. The other that was talked about was renovating the usable portion of the building. I think there are really two factors here. One would be going to have to reduce patron services in all likelihood. But the bigger is, no matter what we do, if we are changing out the furnace, we're changing out the electrical service, we're doing some of these other things, you're going to have to put it in for the size of the whole building. So it's better to think about how do I tackle the whole building in a way that's meaningful than to do parts that I'm already buying a lot of stuff to make work. So again, from a what makes sense here standpoint and what's a good stewardship of taxpayer dollars, all of those didn't really make a lot of sense when we started to compare from a cost standpoint, cost benefit, apples to apples. I think the other option, and I think this is a real consideration that has been kicked around by the board and we're still talking about, this is probably another look into that complete renovation master plan approach that we talked about. What if we do a repairs only approach? I think the caveat to this is when I say repairs only, you just think, oh, I get home, I go fix my kitchen sink, and that's I'm just repairing that. When we're talking about a facility like this, repairs only is I'm probably going to get in and change some spaces up. A perfect example is that space that we talked about on the lower level that has egress issues. For example, that probably needs to be relocated somewhere else in the lower level so that it's got better access. So even though I'm saying repair only, it's probably going to be repair and renovate and move some things around. But if I were to walk in the building after this work were done, I would still feel like it's mostly the same building. So you wouldn't see the level of a lot of different colors and services around the floor plan the way you did in some of these earlier master plan images. It's still going to be largely open. A lot of the things will stay in similar proximity to where you're at. This approach looks at probably, again, not by half, but more of a 14 to 15 million project versus the 23.8 million we're looking about for the full renovation. And again, gets that cost down to $263 to $282 a square foot, which gets to be more of, again, in the commercial world, what's a reasonable renovation cost. If this is the path that we head down, this is not what we were talking about previously when we were talking with the community. And again, part of that's intentional, but part of it is you want to think about what do we need without worrying about this. I think now that we know what everybody wants, we would have to start talking about prioritization. So repairs would be prioritized over patron services and staff spaces, because again, we've got to have the right building, we've got to have a building to start falling off of. So those are going to start to float to the top to solve the priority one issues. So some work may remain incomplete in some spaces as part of that prioritization. Additional services identified in the master plan may or may not be provided. We have to work through that conversation and see, is there something to change? Do we need committee bookshelves? Do we reorganize the bookshelves? What do we do in the space? We would anticipate rather than changes on that upper floor and probably more changes on the lower floor where we have got more challenges down there. But ultimately, we would need further community input to really work through that. I think again, to Dina's point, this has been a very public process, and we want to come back and have that conversation to work with you all and anyone else who wants to show up to say, okay, it's like your own household budget, I've got this much, how do I start to parse this out and what do I do with it? Ultimately, this would result potentially, and there's a lot of conversations that keep happening, so, but could be a bond request then of somewhere in the range of $9.5 to $10.5 million, assuming the library put in some of the funds already got there, versus the current $18 million request that we talked about in the past. So before Jason gets up here and talks even more deeply about numbers, I know they're excited. I'm going to set the stage of this estimates versus bid. We've talked about it a little bit, but I just want to remind everybody more, what is an ideal bond process? And I'm saying this selfishly for me. An ideal bond process is where we obtain approval for a maximum amount. So we would go again, in this case, county council is the approving body, and we would say, hey, can we have authority for up to this amount? We would design and bid the project before we ever took out the bond, and then we would actually issue the bond based on the bids that we got. So again, this is a case of, if I'm wrong, I hope I'm wrong, and I was too high direction, and it comes in $1 million cheaper, that'd be great. So nobody would pay more than what the bids come in for. And so it may be less than that maximum amount that was approved. Unfortunately, a lot of times I get asked, hey, we've got a bond, what can we build for that bond? And I've got to figure out how to fit it in. But I think the fact we're talking about this today, I hope is to follow the ideal process. Because I think there's been some, hey, we think somebody else can do this more cost effectively than they're estimating. Great, when they can bid on this project and do it more cost effectively, and actually issue a lower bond at the end of the day, so that ultimately it would save money in the end. So I think that's part of, in conjunction with the last information we talked about and this, next steps are to figure out kind of where do we go. I think Jason's now going to talk a little bit about if we're higher than this. He's going to talk about that 18 point. I would move on because I can't work. There you go. Thank you.
It's nearly as tall as you.
Oh, sorry.
All right, okay. Thank you very much. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me at tonight's public forum. My name is Jason Cancel, and I'm the director with Baker Tilly. And my role here in this process tonight is to talk about the impact of what a property tax supported bond issuance would have on taxpayers. So as Kevin has outlined here, the current project, as we are looking at, is over $23 million. And unfortunately, the Morrisson-Reeves Library does not have $23 million of funds on hand in order to pay for this project. But it is looking to contribute over $5 million of gifts, grants, and cash. And then coupled with a borrowing amount of $18,720,000 that would provide the $23,815,000 for the project as it stands here this evening. Because these bonds would be payable from property taxes, it's important to keep in mind that, as Kevin mentioned, in an ideal world, we would obviously have a bidding and then issue bonds after the bidding process. And so when we're talking about the tax rate impact of the bonds here this evening, This would not occur next year in 2026. We believe at earliest this would occur in 2027. So potentially having bonds issued in the calendar year 2026, and that would hit the tax rate in 2027. Here on the slide, we have a summary of the claims information that was provided to the library board in its public hearings, as well as to the county council, where again you can see that with a borrowing amount of $18,720,000 and gifts, grants, and cash on hand, we would have $23,815,000 for this project. We would be looking to repay these bonds with a term not to exceed 20 years and an estimated interest expense of $13,854,000. That does utilize a 6% interest rate, which we feel is conservative. Today, the interest rate on a 20-year borrowing is closer to 4.5%. So we are trying to be conservative with that estimate. Ultimately, this would have at the very bottom line there a tax rate increase to the Morrisson-Reeves library tax rate of 10.24 cents. Because currently Morrisson-Reeves does not have any bonds outstanding payable from property taxes. There are no bonds outstanding in the library, so this would be the one that would be outstanding, and then therefore increase the tax rate by this 10.24 cents. Our next slide would provide what a taxpayer would actually, what this 10.24 cents would mean to a taxpayer. So we have provided a range of home values there, as you see, from $75,000 to $300,000. And assuming that an individual taxpayer is not at their tax cap, you would see that, for example, at that $136,000 market value of home, that's the median home value in Wayne County for the U.S. Census Bureau. We would estimate the annual taxpayer impact to be $53.14. We've also provided information for agricultural land, even though we know Morrisson-Reeves Library, majority of the library's jurisdiction is within the city of Richmond. We also have agricultural land assessments where you can see for 100 acres of agricultural land that would be $201.85 per year. And then on a commercial property, this would be $102.40 per year. So again, just reiterating what Kevin said, is that the library does not have these funds available to pay for this all with cash on hand. It would require a property tax supporting bond in the amount of $18,720,000. And here you can see the taxpayer impact of 10.24 cents. Hope now to
So what are the next steps? That's a good question. So, the library board will reconvene at some time in the next few weeks after tonight's forum to discuss the feedback and the questions that you all shared with us this evening, to determine what options to return back to the Wayne County Council to introduce and request for a bond. If the bond succeeds, then we would move forward to the design process as Kevin explained earlier. If the bond request fails, then the board would have to consider, or would possibly consider, to take this to referendum in November of 2026. So you see it extends the timeline out a little bit more. And then three, and this is kind of in chronological order because it's like a domino effect. One thing has to happen before the next thing, before the next thing, because each decision kind of begets the next thing. The third being, determine the best approach for the continuation of services for the library. As you can imagine, if we're not successful with the bond, we still have the issues in the building, they're still existing. We're still seeing deterioration and issues with the building. So we would continue to look to relocate. How long we would be somewhere else, we just wouldn't have any idea. At what point do we come back to the table? 5 years, 10 years, we would have no idea at all. So that would be existing cost for the library. We own the land. Morrisson-Reeves Library has owned the land for 160 years. We don't pay a lease. So now we're talking about lease payment, we're talking existing payments. We might have to, say, like retrofit a space, we're having to do that right now. So those are things to consider in terms of relocating indefinitely. If we are successful, we would still probably have to get a building for a shorter period of time. We would try to make that work, but we'd have a lot more flexibility because it would be a shorter period of time that we would have to do that. The other option for unsuccessful is to reduce the current footprint of the building that we're in now, so that we're avoiding the problematic areas, like I was kind of explaining. If we were to do like a smaller renovation, that's kind of what we would also want to consider in terms of if we're not able to get the money for the renovation, is there a way for us to just go down to one floor? Do we use our existing savings, the money that we were bringing to the table for the renovation to satisfy temporary solutions until maybe the fiscal environment is better in the state of Indiana and locally? So these are the things that the board has to consider. They're very weighty things, and there's other options to other things to consider, but we have to kind of go in order. What has to happen before we're able to make a decision on the next and then make a decision on the next. So that's what things are at right now. So I'm going to turn this over to Jennifer Lewis, our board president, for some closing words and then to open things up for questions from the room.
Good evening. My name is Jennifer Lewis, and it has been my great privilege to serve on the Board of Trustees for Morrisson-Reeves Library for the last 8 years, and as its president for the last 5. I'm joined by 2 of my fellow board members, Adam Flores and Stacia Barron. Susan Adams also serves on the board. I want to express my gratitude, our gratitude, to all of you for being here this evening and for your interest and investment in this process all throughout the last year. I especially want to thank the members of the County Council and county commissioners and county council who have also joined us this evening. I'm really grateful to have you here. Since our last public meeting before the county council in August, a number of community members have reached out to express support for the renovation project and to ask for clarification about a number of specific questions. We have attempted to address many of these questions through this presentation. I want to take a few moments to talk with you about the role of the library's Board of Trustees and to describe the process we have taken to arrive where we are tonight. As members of the Board of Trustees for Morrisson-Reeves Library, 2 of our main responsibilities are to ensure that the library is responding effectively to our community's needs and to plan for the library's long-term sustainability and future. This is a voluntary position, as Dina mentioned, and though the library is a government agency, it is not a political role. Our job is simply to advocate for Morrisson-Reeves Library and its mission, and to act as fiduciaries on behalf of the community's needs and interests to ensure that the library remains a place and a space that serves everyone in our community. As it turns out, this role is both simple and complicated. The board carefully weighed the information that we've been provided by LWC about options for renovating our building, the associated costs. We also reviewed information gathered from the community during our strategic and master planning processes. As individuals, we view these issues through very different lenses, and we sometimes strongly disagreed and debated about what we thought was the best way to proceed, though I think it's important to emphasize that we did so with respect. This was not a rushed decision. The board took its time to cautiously discern what we believed to be the best and most fiscally responsible path forward for Morrisson-Reeves and for our community. We presented this to the County Council in August, and we are now open to continue discussion with the Council to determine together the best solution for all concerned. I believe this is precisely the way a process like this is supposed to work. It is worth noting that Morrisson-Reeves has a demonstrated record for responsible financial stewardship. We've anticipated the challenges to our operating budget coming as a result of recent state and federal legislation, and we've planned accordingly. We have not requested a bond approval since our current building was constructed in 1975, and that bond was paid off in the late 90s. We've carefully saved money in a rainy day fund as we have been able, and we have invested gifts we haven't given so that they can grow. As the result of these careful measures, Morrisson-Reeves is able to bring almost $5 million of our own funds to the table to contribute to this renovation. This is highly unusual for a government agency to be in a position to do this, and it demonstrates Morrisson-Reeves' fiscal prudence. The Morrisson-Reeves board and staff have engaged in discussions and deliberations about our proposed renovation project publicly, and we have been transparent with the community throughout this process. We have actively sought public feedback and involvement every step of the way through multiple community forum sessions such as this, through our webpage of surveys, emails, articles in local newspapers, social media, local radio stations, and in-person engagements. Morrisson-Reeves monthly board meetings are also open to the public. In other words, the board's decisions about this proposed renovation project have not been made in private or in a vacuum. The sole purpose of a public library is to serve and support the community, and the community should be central to every aspect of this decision. Because ultimately the Morrisson-Reeves building belongs to the community. It belongs to you and to me and to most of us up on this stage, to everyone in this room. We, as the board and the staff, see ourselves as stewards of this valuable public resource, which has existed at its current location since 1864. And we take that job very seriously. We believe Morrisson-Reeves Library is one of the cornerstones of Richmond's downtown and of a strong and vibrant Lee County community. Again, on behalf of the Morrisson-Reeves board, I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We'd like now to transition into a time of question and answer. I want to be clear that this is a time for audience members to ask lingering questions that they did not feel were addressed in tonight's presentation, but not yet a time for comments. If we have time after the Q&A, we will then invite comments from the audience. There are microphones at the end of each aisle for audience questions, and we ask that you please use them to ask your question. We want to make sure everybody can hear you in this space, and the session is also being recorded and will be shared on our website for later viewing.
I wrote this down because it's been on my mind, and I prefer the answer to be as plain as the question I am to tell you. As the matter stands now, does this mean that without funding, that the library will be rendered ineffective? And does that also mean that opposition to this proposal is the same as ordering the demolition of the library? My name is Benjamin Gardner, for lack of a better word, I'm just a local troublemaker.
I think we all are.
Can you summarize your two questions? I mean, it's very hard to hear. I'm struggling. I know you have 2 points. I know that the second point, I can understand that the vote will be a vote to demolish the building. But what was the first?
If the library does not receive the money you're asking for, does that mean, not saying tomorrow, not saying a year from now, but at some point the library will cease to exist as it does? And so does that has to mean that if the government does not support this, are they ordering the library to be closed?
I'm happy to confirm that. So, no, but it would certainly change. We don't have to serve out of the existing building. We own it because it was granted to us, built to us by Robert Morrison, many, many moons ago, and that's where we lived. But the funding that we receive to operate the library, that comes from this, as far as the levy, that's not going to change because of this renovation. Those things can change for other reasons, but they don't have anything to do with the renovation. Does that answer your question?
Not exactly, but I hear your point.
Okay, all right.
And to the second point, I mean, that's quite information that's provided. A vote no on this bond doesn't stop this process and we demolish the building. There's a referendum option. We've expressed with Kevin's help and ability to move that 18 million number down to a 9.5 to 10.5 million number. So we're trying to create options that do anything other than create a position where we're demolishing the building. Nobody wants that. I don't think anybody on the county council They just have some budgetary constraints, and they've got obligations, and they're trying to do the best that they can too. So that second question, I don't think there's anybody in this room, in this community, that wants that or seeks for that to be some sort of result of all of this process.
Good evening. My name is Bruce Leopold. Excuse my voice of congestion, but I am not a troublemaker. I'm an advocate for our community and complete cooperation with all of the bodies that are. I really appreciate the working on here. I certainly appreciate the county council members that are taking this into account. My question is, are there county council members present? And if they are, they may be identified for the record. Thank you.
I'll leave that to. All right. I would say this real quick, that if you want to introduce yourselves, you all can, and if not, we can at least identify, that we have a huge contingent from our county here, and I was thrilled. I was absolutely thrilled that we have people from our county here. I can look out and I see we have pretty substantial figureheads, whether it's with economic development, with our chamber, with organizations that are doing everything and anything they can to support and grow our downtown. This is exactly what we had hoped for, and that is here. And so we do have a lot of members, not just here, but I can see them throughout. We have a lot of members. If you'd like to take the time, you may.
Very solid. Max Smith, County Council. Barry River, County Council.
Dr. Supervisor, City
We're not just in one spot. We have a really good contingent of people here. Anyone else from government? And I do want to recognize that we do have, as I indicated, I see renovation Richmond, I see economic development, I see our chamber, and to me, growing up, it was our foundation as well. To me, is that's what this is all about. It shows that I'm in the right spot, I move my family to the right spot, and I'm trying to stay in the right spot, and all of you are here to do this.
Hi, I'm Anna. I am a long-time visitor to Richmond. I've spent my childhood visiting family here, but as of a year ago, I became a resident. So it's nice to be here. The library was the first place I went, and thank you for all you're doing. It's great to see the council here. That kind of is part of my question. I kind of have two now, but if someone wants to go, please go. But I wanted to know, is the council aware of these issues, which obviously they are, and are they helping you with these suggestions that I've seen, like the mayor and the council make, with like, well, we can't touch this building, but let's help you relocate, because my understanding through the grapevine is that you can't find spaces that are willing to work with you to relocate, even in the short term. And so my second part of that question, just to go off of what you said, if you do end up in a space like JCPenney where renovations need to happen before you can open the interim library, are you then going to have to come back and ask for money for those renovations? Are we going to kind of start from square one?
So I think I understand the first question.
I'm really grateful.
I have great difficulty, so it takes me a little while to hear your process.
Your first question talked about the interaction between government and our.
Yeah, just from my perception at the council meeting, there was a lot of like, well, we just can't afford this, you guys need to find somewhere else to move. And I know that everyone has the best intention, but is there real collaboration happening there? Like, is it, or is it kind of just falling on all of you to find these solutions?
No, I don't think that it's falling on all of us.
Okay.
I think we've heard comments, questions, concerns from council, and so are a little different than what we presented in August. So, do we all want way more collaboration? Probably. We're volunteers and we're trying to run a county, so that can be very difficult. But I don't think there's been a vacuum of communication. I think there's been some good communication that enabled us to kind of change our path a little bit.
I would also say we're open to more communication and we're open to continued communication, but I also think it's important to note, I don't think it's the county council's job to help us find a space to relocate. I mean, I think, and we have been looking for that, and as indicated, we've had some difficulties with that, even if we were to renovate and have to move into another space. It's not easy to find a space that would accommodate us, but I think that's our job. I think Dina can say on it, but I mean, it seems to me that that's our role.
Sure, it just seems like as a community, we can help each other. You know?
Sure. Yeah.
So that was kind of my question. And then will we have to pay for the renovations for the interim spaces?
Yes, we would.
And we would have to come back to council and ask for that. Okay.
And see, that's where it gets into that $5 million.
Okay.
And of course, what Kevin said, that projects that are designed, thought about and approved today are built 2 years.
Right.
And I think we indicated a 12% increase in just 1 year. So
Sure.
that's why we need to come to a result and know what we need to do. And the goal would not be to spend $5 million on a temporary.
Thank you for your time.
And I think still add to that, just because for clarity, if any project is ahead of the scale that we're talking about, the library is moving out, even if that's temporarily. And again, that's not unusual in our world. I've had a couple of libraries who have tried to stay in place. It is no fun for anybody involved. And to a person, they all said, gosh, we wish we would listen to you and moved out at the beginning because it goes faster, it's way cheaper, and it doesn't impact everybody at the level. So the library will have to move out for a time if anything in the scale of what we're talking about happens. What we will then likely to do is minimal renovations to just make the bare minimum of things happen, so as much money as possible can go back into the project. And the library will have to work through what's available on the floor versus what we get through evergreens. There will be some operational stuff that we'll need to get worked through.
The bond considers, is that built into the bond?
Correct. And that's why, again, you're seeing when I say everything is in there, that's why it's a big limited number, because there's cost to move books back, put them back on the shelf. There's just a lot of stuff that goes into these projects. So.
Very good. I'm sorry about the question.
Not at all.
Hi, thank you all. My name is Katie Thor, I'm a resident, former employee of the library many months ago. One question, I keep hearing 20 years. Is this a 20-year fix or possibly beyond?
I'll take that one. So portions are going to be in that 20 to 25 year range. And I'm saying that because that's the intended life cycle of some of these systems, like some of the mechanical systems, some of the light fixtures, and things that you think about getting in your house. Some of those are in that 20 to 30 year range. So for some things, yes, that's true. I think in the case of an flag has been raised, or like how the heck did we get here with like some of the roof and some of the brick? No, those would be longer than 20-year fixes. I mean, to me, those are more pushing for 75+ year fixes. I think, and I'm going to go further on this because I think I've heard the board be criticized about why did you let it get to this point? I don't think anybody let anything happen with any knowledge or ill intent. I think it was a case of, and Adam said earlier, the library board has other jobs that they do. They were relying on other people to provide good information upon which to take action. They did not do good information, unfortunately. And again, I don't think anybody necessarily hired the wrong people. I just think it was a series of events that got to that place. So I think as soon as the library had the information we brought, there was, immediately like, all right, let's move and start this process because we know we need to do something. So.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Suzanne Brenner. I grew up here and then moved back 5 years ago. If you don't get the bond, which I hope you do, what happens to the price of the cost of this. If you can't do it until, say, 2027, do you think it goes up 10%? Do you think it goes up, I don't know if that counts, it's extreme, but like, will we be in a much worse off space and have to take a bigger bond out because the council may not approve it now?
So there is no cheaper time to do the project than right now. I've never had anybody come back and say, gosh, the price is 50%. Okay, the one exception is 2008-9. I did have some schools that were like, we don't know how to spend all this money because the prices dropped out on everything. But again, it's kind of like a Great Depression. That just doesn't happen on a normal basis. I went back and was actually looking at the numbers to get these slides put together in the last 5 years because I looked at the numbers from 2020 to 2025. The increase in construction costs was 43%. And that's just in 5 years. Again, I know these were a unique 5 years, but again, when I go back 20 years, because we've got data back that far, no year did it go down in the average total cost. So the short answer is yes. To guess at what that is, and it's just so hard to tell with all the factors that go into that.
Yeah, I knew it was definitely going to go up. I don't know if people think about that when they're making decisions, because they make decisions in today's dollars.
Correct.
Instead of future dollars. So I just thought I would point that out if anyone listening, that maybe we should think about that too.
And I think that was some of the trying to get to a point we can get a bond issuance versus a referendum, because we do lose a year, and who knows what a year could bring again, and cost increases and things like that. So I think there is always that urgency. The other thing I will point out, because you brought it up, is we have assumed, I believe it's 2 years of inflation at 6% in those numbers. Just as a safety factor, because again, we start, even if you said, hey, we can start today, we need probably 9 to 12 months to get the thing designed. You're not building for another year or two. So in fairness, we got to try to build that in. So that's been part of the board's conversation and sense of urgency to move forward.
Hi, Jake Gaines here, and I had 2 questions. One is out of curiosity and ignorance, but when it comes to seeing about community support, has there been any sort of like ballot or other than the online survey that has been done, asking about like taxpayer, would you be interested in your tax money going to support a library or for a community center? I think that I can't think of a better community center for Richmond, and I think we need one. But I was curious if something like that's been done to maybe see the level of support. And then the other question was, and it might have been addressed, but I just don't recall, if everything went splendidly, if everything, I know it's not really so there's no hiccups, but if everything moved according to this plan as fast as it could, what's the soonest you believe the project could be, your ideal project would be done?
I can take the sort of the legal half of the first question. So this project was subject to petition remonstrance, which means that we ran it out in the newspaper and waited the 30 days. We did receive no applications of anyone who wanted to challenge the project. So we have already been through the first legal taxpayer opposition process and did not receive any opposition. I know the library's done some more fun surveys and data collection, but from the legal side, we have been through our first taxpayer opposition opportunity.
Level of support, the second topic, who wants to talk about level of support, we get a brief rundown of your meetings.
Yeah, I mean, while we haven't captured data, we haven't taken survey numbers about how much support versus how much opposition. I would say anecdotally, overwhelming support and feedback from the community. Criticisms were more related to why, and actually fed a lot of what was presented in this meeting. Is like, let's answer these questions. I think maybe there's confusion more so than criticism. The minority we have is a concern for cost, as we all are. Things are getting more expensive. But I don't think we've heard opposition in terms of, we don't want our library anymore, or we're not going to provide the library, so it's been mostly a cost, but I would say, like I said, anecdotally, it's been overwhelming. In terms of our engagement, we've had thousands and thousands of, social media responses, email, people in our emails, we spent multiple emails, so I can say that in terms of like that, there's some data there, but we haven't captured like pro versus con, or support versus not support, the overwhelmingly positive. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
And along those lines, I think one of the slides I saw indicated that there were some 36,000 kind of personal hits or interactions related to this project. And then your final question talked about ETAs, so I'd ask Kevin if a bond vote was approved in say November, December of this year, what kind of time frame goes into our how many years until all these, especially some of these fine people that are in every ribbon cutting in our town, would show up to our library front door with a big red banner to cut in half?
Conservatively, I think it would be in early 2028. I mean, if we could get more aggressive in the design schedule, bidding schedule, things like that, maybe late 2027. I'm still going to probably hang my hat on more of a early to mid 2028, primarily because if we are talking about shrinking the scale of it, that's going to take some involvement in the community. I think we're going to want to allow that time for feedback.
Thank you, and just to reiterate what she was asking, or maybe it was the person beforehand, if the bond didn't go through, you're saying the library, it's not that the library would just suddenly cease to function, it would just have to, what we know as the service would just change in locality, the scope. Okay, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Rod Goodman. My wife Laurie and I are both longtime visitors to Richmond and we both moved here about 2 years ago. We are property owners in town, and for what it's worth, we support the bond. My question is this: if this measure is funded through a bond measure that is paid for by the taxpayers, I'm curious to know what the detractors to this measure are saying, whether on county council or otherwise.
Okay, I'll take this. Again, Jason alluded to it. And because of the total tax rate within the city of Richmond, the majority of taxpayers are at their individual tax caps. So if under the current process, this bond is approved, the taxpayer may not actually pay what we show it to be conservative in case the individual is not their tax cap. If they are at their tax cap, that actually becomes revenue loss to overlapping tax units. And so, for example, it would be a loss to Wayne County, it would be a revenue loss to the city of Richmond, Wayne Township, Richmond Sanitary. So that is definitely a factor to consider as far as potentially a consequence of this bond issuance and the additional levy.
And has that figure of folks been taken into account? Has this potential impact thereof?
We did provide the information to the county council at the meeting in August. For example, for Wayne County, it would be a loss of approximately $254,000 annually.
And I think some of those numbers have been provided to the other taxing units. The fact that Richmond Community Schools has come out with a certain position on this. The mayor was at our council's last meeting in August, and he's taking to social media and some other things. His positions are on this, but I think those are because of the fact that a good number of us are at our tax cap. And so it's fun to say, I'd be willing to pay an extra $250 for a $20 million library. That sounds fine. You're welcome to. We've got money for the friends of the library. Absolutely, I think that's a wonderful thing to do there. But we can't force those people, so then those taxing units entities have to say, oh, we have to cover that $250 for the house. And I don't think there's animosity or anything negative about it, it's just a matter of, it's sprung on them. It's sprung on them at a time when our legislature decided to spring a whole bunch else on them. And so it's, that's just kind of where we are. But that's where, I think that answers your second part of your question. Yes.
And I think I'm going to go a little further with the things sprung on them. I mean, the reality of the legislation that's out there is that everybody's budgets are shrinking, all the organizations that are listed. So then to have on that the added benefit of losing money for this project just makes life more challenging. So again, to Adam's comment, I don't think they're criticism, I just think they're the acknowledgement of the reality of how do we have to make the library work, but all the other services in the county continue to work. It's just the reality that everyone's dealing with right now.
I think it's also important to point out that those other budgets affect our budgets as well. So we're all kind of working with the same pot of money and trying to figure out how to share it. But that affects us too when those other entities get bonds. So I think that's another important piece of the equation, which they have bonds at this point.
Thank you. Thank you.
So my second question, you've mentioned a lot about timelines, and it's been stated at both the council meeting and tonight that the building is unsafe and progressively gets more unsafe every second, every minute, every meeting that is held. When does the library become too unsafe to function, and therefore you have to have a decision where you're moving, if you're rebuilding, because you mentioned if this goes through, we're waiting until November of next year. Is that even a possibility?
I'm going to answer it before the where answer.
I'm still going to talk.
He is. I do want to just give some context because I feel like this has gotten lost over time as we're talking about what's right here in front of us. And it's why I mentioned that this process started back in 2024. When I brought up the issues that were on the screen, the immediate reaction of some folks, and I would say the general consensus on the board is, oh my gosh, we need to consider moving out right now. I think that there was then a bit of a, let's decide what we're going to do, think about this, and if we're going to move out, can we schedule this so that it happens in a way that we're moving out only once and disrupting service only once. So let's be thoughtful and conscientious about not only disruption of service, but it costs money every time we move stuff. And I think that's the reason, like, if you look real close, like there's some netting that's even gone up over the front entryways. Honestly, it kind of goes away if you're not looking for it, but it is there. So the library has taken some steps to mitigate some of these concerns, to try to get this to the point that, to what you're asking, to the extent that's possible, it is made safe. And again, I'm going to still extend the caveat that I'm acknowledging the unsafety in today's code considerations. That's the lens through which I'm looking at this, not necessarily when the buildings built, just for clarity. And raising the flag that if we're going to start renovating, we need to start doing these.
And you've got board of trustees with 4 different people with 4 different perspectives. I come from the perspective where I look for the worst. I don't want anybody hurt there. I don't want anybody doing. That's fair. I mean, I take a lot of the love, rainbows, hugs, and kisses, and different things out of that building, and that's kind of my perspective on it. So I have to have some of these other thoughts come in too. So I have my opinion, and we have other trustees. So what's the decision going to be? It's going to be what it's done for the last 2 years. We're going to talk about it. We're probably going to grind our teeth a little bit. Somebody may not get what they want, but it'll be a good decision that's thought out. I think that's the best way that we got here today and what we would do depending on whatever vote comes about.
to hold space for the fact that you are a board of directors, that you cannot share everything with the public immediately. When, as the public, can we expect some more of these worst case and best case scenario answers, at least in my opinion, and I know I share amongst others, that are not being spoken out loud? I know that's asking to put a timeline on a timeline, but is it even possible? Is it something I can't be asking?
I'm not sure that I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm struggling.
Okay, so my question is, you are saying you don't want anyone to be injured at the library. You don't want anybody to be at risk getting your services. Well, when does that line cross? When do these Band-Aid solutions no longer support the structure?
And again, I'll give the answer before maybe the attorney gives the answer, because, you know, in my opinion, life is risk. The code is about risk mitigation, but it doesn't make risk go away at the end of the day. So ultimately, it's a matter of, you know, somebody can trip tomorrow and building is 100% code compliant with today's codes, you know. And the reality is the codes have adjusted over time based off of, unfortunately, tragedies, and then people reevaluate and say, gosh, we should try to put an exit closer and require that going forward. So I don't think there is a building that exists that does not have some level of risk. I think that's where, from the standpoint of a risk tolerance, is what it comes down to. I'm just gonna, this is my opinion, this building has existed the way it is. It was, somebody signed off and said it was safe the day it was built. So I don't feel like the library has done anything to make that worse. They're trying to make that better. And I would say, getting back to just, because the code is the world I live in, the code is pretty clear, like, as long as you're not making things worse, you are not, you know, doing harm to things, basically. So it's gonna come down to the board and what is the risk tolerance and the space they're at versus get out. And that's why I brought up the knee-jerk reaction was, gosh, let's get out now because we want the public to be safe. We feel that is part of our responsibility as the board. I think the only reason it slowed down was, again, trying to balance that. We want to keep people safe with, we don't want to disrupt services any more than necessary. And again, I think it's a balancing act that there's not a clear answer to it.
And along those lines, I think we're trying to be very clear and open with everybody about what the problems are. And it might be fair to say that we didn't open a year and a half ago with, we don't have smoke detectors and sprinklers. You identified yourself, I believe, as a troublemaker, right? You have not been a troublemaker like we've seen since that information came out. There are people that like to do bad, that like to cause harm. And we've seen, since that information has come out about the safety of the building, people trying to do things. And so that comes into our risk tolerance. You may be a troublemaker and ask too many questions, easy. But we do have some real ones in town that could make life terrible for a regular patron just looking to receive some service of our library. And so these are all the things that are coming about that we have to think about.
Thank you for your answers.
Hi, my name is Teresa, and my family moved here when I was in summer before starting elementary school. And I know I don't look a day over 25, but I actually went to the library that used that spiral staircase, and I'm really glad I don't have to use it now. And I would probably want to use it, even though I had all the renovations done, I was just trying to fall right there. But I don't like to spend my taxes on things I don't use. I use the library all the time. So I would still be a friend of the library donor if it's a tax room, all that stuff. So that's just a preface to say that, you've got to look. My question was, if I'm hearing correctly, that the vote is going to come up in the fall of 2027 this year. Projected time. When will we be voting on it at first, do you think?
So at this point, it's really up to the worker between the council and the library to determine when it goes back to the council. So our next step would be a vote from the county council, which could happen as soon as the end of this year. it could happen next year. Ultimately, they tabled the motion rather than failing it, which should have that, right? Like, with everything that was given us time, tabling the motion was kind of the best that popped up at that meeting. So it's really a matter of when the council is ready to take that back to the table. And then from there, we will continue through the process, hopefully continue through the process of the issuance. If the council were to fail the motion, I think then we would be looking at the library's potentially interest in the referendum option, which would be essentially restarting the legal steps of the issuance process, and that would be on the ballot in February next year.
You might, since you touched on this, you might talk about the similarity or dissimilarity between the referendum process where that lands with the council in 2026, 2027, and how it's similar or dissimilar to where we are today.
So I think that's an important question we're thinking to talk through. So with the way the Indiana law is structured, were we to take this through a referendum, it would be the exact same process we've already done. So the referendum thresholds are based on two things now, under SB1, but for the purposes of the library, who does not have correct outstanding, they're based on the total project cost. Because of the additional gifts and grants that the library is using, the total project cost is under that referendum number. So we were under what is called petition remonstrance. For either a referendum or a petition remonstrance process, we are going to publish the same notice, which we already did earlier this year. We wait 30 days, and it's up to the public to say, yes, we would like this to go to referendum, or yes, we would like this to go to petition remonstrance. There were no applicants for petition remonstrance this time. If the library really wanted this to go to our referendum, if we really wanted to vote on this, which would be a choice that could be made. If the library supporters really wanted to force a vote, they would need to have the lesser than 545% of registered voters to apply to go to a referendum. So it's the same process to either get to referendum or get to petition remonstrance that we've already been through this year for petition remonstrance. We would still go back to the council, even if you pass referendum, you do still go back to the council for approval. So the one thing that would be sort of the most important change here is that referendum debt is typically outside the tax caps. So that would be.
That's the point I was going to get to.
So the tax caps were really the circuit breaker tax credits. That was the tax credit, or the tax change that essentially makes it one pie, a pie that is currently shrinking. Referendum debt is treated a little bit differently in that it's outside of that pie.
So in that case, it would be a direct tax rather than having any of these governmental agencies have to adjust to the bond issuance paper of the Morrisson-Reeves Library. Their financial state would remain as is, and this would then be forced into a direct imposition of additional tax on that.
Correct. So this would be a tax increase to folks who, even folks who are out their tax after the circuit breaker. I will say referendums are very rare, particularly on the library side. They're a little bit more common on the school side. We've had one since this has become an option to Jasper Libraries. So it is fairly rare.
But I think that's good information, it's not really been discussed, and it's fair to council to have that out there, and it's fair to all of you to know that that's how this process works, that it does have different impacts. Thank you. Don't let her go, she's a lawyer too, she'll talk about it. I'll just call her out. No, you go ahead, we'll be here all night, heard me talk.
Hi, my name is Anna Morrisson-Reeves. So, first off, I am support of the library. It is not just the hazard of books, it is the community support. I've used it for many, many things. And I don't mind paying my taxes
I do not mind paying any property taxes, not just for here, but many other things that have been passed here recently. If the funds get used appropriately, which I feel like they will here. Not just for me, but for so many people in this community. But if I'm understanding right, there is a map that will not pay this, right? Can you explain that a little bit better? I know that you said Western Community Schools obviously will not be, right? And I understand that because they're like special, and like Reed Hospital, I imagine will not be, right? But like, is there actual properties, like me as a property owner, would I know, is there like neighborhoods, like specifically, that would be excluded from paying, like fees? Like, I want to help, right? But like I want to be like, oh, look at me, and like, I want to help, but like, can you explain like that a little bit better?
So I'll start, and then I'll pass it over to you guys to talk a little bit about the actual library district. Morrisson-Reeves is a unique animal. So the library was created, by a township, which most of our counties were by the city itself. It was actually created through a bill. And then it also serves as the Wayne County Library for a contractual business. So for this bond, the bond is only paid by the Morrisson-Reeves Library District itself, not the entire county.
So where would I be able to find this map? Can you help me?
There are 4 taxing districts that comprise Morrisson-Reeves Library, and it is Wayne Township 028, Wayne Sands area 029, Richmond City 030, and Spring Grove Town 031. So Spring Grove Town, Richmond City, Wayne Township, Wayne Sands area, those are the 4 districts that comprise the taxing base of Morrisson-Reeves Library.
It's important to note too that the actual footprint, the geographical footprint of that in the whole county is very small in comparison to the whole county. So the brunt of this is going to fall on most of the folks that live here in this area.
Okay, so basically, if you're in the city of Richmond itself, you will be paying. Okay. Then I
If it's a referendum. Good question.
Material. All right, I'm Jessica Richards, a local attorney, business owner. I grew up in Richmond and lots of memories of the library, specifically the spiral staircase and so on. So I hope it gets saved for the staircase. But so my attorney brings me the first question, which is yes, I'm concerned about the bricks falling on people's heads and things falling out. I'm assuming some of that's going to be fixed now, regardless, right?
And that's where I mentioned there was some netting and things, but it'd be entry points to secure those, yes.
Okay. And then the second part is, obviously, people here, you want us to pay more taxes and this and that, and so everybody's thinking numbers. But is there anything in the renovation plans, as opposed to expanding, using spaces for the public and whatnot, that could have a positive impact on that would benefit all of us?
I think that was addressed at council, and it's set up to me, and it was Dina, and you indicated what the dollar per multiple of 5 or 5.43. I think he started to test you here in front of everybody. And it is really interesting how a dollar to the library, what the impact is.
Yeah, so in terms of our return on investment, so there's actually kind of feedback in here. Okay. All right. So in the library world, because we're all data nerds, right? There, I want to say it's Syracuse library. Anyway, many moons ago, they put together basically return on investment on things that you can't necessarily. They're not, quantifiable Obviously, you can quantify a book. How much is a book? How many times it circulates? That's a little easier versus, helping somebody notarizing their will, or, I mean, maybe we don't charge for that. That's for you guys. You want something notarized, come to the library, we do that. But providing the service, doing story times. Absolutely, like how do you put a number on that? How do you put a return on that? So they did that, and so we use those. Many libraries across America use this calculator. It's like basically a library. What is it worth? What is your library worth calculator? So using that, we basically give back about 5.5 times back to the community the taxes that we take in. So we're giving about a 550% return on investment to the community. So in terms of like the economic impact is huge. We do a lot for the community that you can't necessarily, or wouldn't want to necessarily do yourself. Like maybe you checked out 100 books this year. Do you really want to go buy 100 books? I certainly don't. I can tell you that's something I want to book. But that type of thing. For the renovation itself, one of the things that we would incorporate into the larger design because of the feedback we've gotten is to provide more support to small businesses. So that's something that we see a lot of. When people use our meeting rooms, it's increasing about 33% every single year. It's amazing how much our spaces are getting used. So it's not necessarily that we're giving money, but we're saving people money. Especially if, maybe you have a small business, maybe you're coming to the library for the meeting that you have with somebody rather than renting space somewhere. So it kind of changes the economy. We're taking money away, and it's not too big, but we're actually giving it back.
So there's a potential for essentially increasing the tax base that wouldn't have much that cap.
Absolutely.
So that could be a diminishing issue in terms of if you have to tap into the county budget, so to speak.
And because we are providing services that maybe other units can't, because, funding's an issue, and future funding's a little unclear right now for a lot of our government units, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beth Herrick. Thanks for the presentation tonight. So happy to see so many people here. I have 3 questions. The first one is short for Kevin. For the $9 to $10 million reno, would that require relocation? I think the answer is yes.
Yes, at least
Thank you.
30% of the project.
Great. My second question is, the total loss was $254,000 annually?
To Wayne County, yes.
And is that the total, or is that just a Wayne County Council's pot?
The Wayne County Council. So we have estimates for the overlap agreements as well. Obviously, mentioned Wayne Township would have a loss of $19,000. Spring Grove Town would have an additional loss of $2,000. Richmond City would have an additional loss of $483,000. Richmond Schools, $243,000. Morrisson-Reeves Library, their circuit breaker would increase by almost $600,000. And then Richmond Sanitary, $158,000. And so the majority of the levy, as it stands today, would be additional circuit breaker losses to overlapping tax needs, including Morrisson-Reeves Library.
Thank you. And my last question, though I really want to talk with you more about petitionary monstrances, which I know I'm not saying that right.
Nobody has ever said that out loud. Nobody said, I want to learn more about petitions and
The referendum, just for clarity, would require county council's approval of what? And the voters would be Wayne Township residents?
So no matter what, we would be required to have county council approval.
Of the amount of the, we haven't had referendums much since I lived here, so I don't know what is needed.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Libraries are subject to a pretty unique statute, and it's because these guys are appointed and not elected. So even if we took the project itself through a vote, we would still need approval of the actual debt from the council, so from a fiscal body. So the process outside of Commissioner Montclair's versus referendum would not change. So we would still need to go to the council for the same approval, the same appropriation hearing, and the same approval of the debt. And then I'm sorry, what was your question?
Oh, actual voters.
Yes.
Voters and 51, over 50% of the voters, and who are the voters?
Correct. So the voters would be voters who live within the Morrisson-Reeves Library District would be the voters. And it would be majority voters.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Nick Dunlap. I was just asking clarification on the tax question. So I'm a homeowner here in Richmond, but I also own some farmland. And so I was just double checking the tax rate is increasing 10.41 or is it 0.1041 on residential?
The current estimated tax rate increase would be 10.24%.
10.24. And then the agriculture,
So that's the same rate regardless, it's just different assessed value on your home versus the assessed value of your agricultural.
thank you so much.
My name is Beth Treaster, formerly director of the Central Library, now retired. And I'm aware, and I wonder if everyone's aware, that the library services anywhere in this county are exactly the same, the scope of services. But for decades now, the people who live out of Wayne Township pay much, much less for those identical services. So the people in Waynesburg, Economy, Boston, so on, pay a fraction of those who live in Richmond. I had tried to get that addressed, Mary Ann Brothers and I had talked about it, we felt like there just was no will to change that system. But given this is where we're at right now, the Morrisson-Reeves need, and the fact that it's the biggest library supply in the county, is it time to readdress how the tax dollars are apportioned out to the outlying townships?
So I would say, it's a complicated question, right? And it's a question that I think libraries across the state are considering right now. Wayne County is fortunate that the library that Morrisson-Reeves has been willing to. Things are a little bit more complicated post SB1 because it would not allow the library's overall budget to grow. In SB1, the only budget appeals that you can make right now are based on annexation. Unfortunately, libraries do not annex. So even if we were to double our service area or our official service area, it would not have the operating budget, which I think is really frustrating. I think was an unintended consequence in SB1. However, it would, increasing the total area of the library would obviously spread out the tax burden for the debt piece of this.
We are coming up on our ending time, so you go to the last question. That's not pressure.
Laura Becker, thank you for the presentation and answers so many of their questions. What was that term for the area that the library district? Library district. Do we have data for the number of families that live in the library district that regularly interact with our library? Because I'm there once a week, but I'm sure.
Well, we have the library card holder, so if you live in the district, you can be a library card holder. So and you can listen, that's it. I want to say we have around 13,500 library card holders. Let's see. Yeah, around 13,500 library card holders, so in the district. And our district covers around 39,000 people. So that gives you an idea of, the percentage of
actual library users in the district.
And that is your question, not include the people who show up for events, right? So if we start talking about folks walking through the door, people coming in, people join things who may not have library card, that now expands that number even more, so.
Sure. Also, two of them are my children who can't go yet. Also. One other thing, you mentioned about deteriorating structure. As we are talking about this for months, the interior structure that is currently salvageable and workable is in danger of also becoming compromised and degrading because of that.
I mean, it's hard to put a definitive yes or no on. The only thing I'll say is that the library's taking measures to mitigate those in the meantime, so I'm going to say they're doing what they can to prevent further damage. So, no, to the extent that we could prevent anything.
Yeah, we've not stopped maintenance, we've not stopped the facility repair, but those, each month at every meeting, they grow exponentially, and they start making it to the next one, and as Kevin indicated, there's kind of initial kind of survey of the building. Once you have dry water inside, you know it's going a long path to get there, so, we're not stopping to try to fix it, but it is a really hard question.
And I would say in terms of cost as well, we have seen an exponential increase in costs in repairs. So I think we spent $200,000 in repairs in the last year and a half or so, and that's astronomical. You know, we're talking elevator that was $50,000 for those of you that were coming to the library. The elevator was down for about 6 weeks. That was just to make a repair in an elevator. That's not a replacement or to update it. HVAC, there was for months almost every week to have somebody in there repair the HVAC. So, you know, they're failing, we're doing what we can to repair them, but the cost is growing and the volume of having to repair them, it's more and more frequently, it's happening. The repairs that are happening are getting more expensive. So we do see the growing cost with adding the Band-Aids to the building. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I have to take right in the last our time. I want to thank again all of you for coming. I want to thank again all the members of council, various councils and commissioners who are here tonight. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to thank everyone who's on the stage for your time and the Reed Center for this space. We really appreciate your involvement and investment in this process, and we